Sign here, or I will make you lose your business license. Victoria Davenport's cold threat echoed inside the copper drip. From the dirty floor, Quincy Miller looked up to face the arrogant eyes of the beautiful female CEO. In remote Cascade Ridge, Quincy wanted to use his last $45,000 to build a home for his 8-year-old daughter. But the woman standing there ruined his career at Apex, and now she wanted to steal this old coffee shop too. Quincy refused to back down, starting an unequal fight against the financial giant. With dirty lawyer tricks, financial pressure, and a dirty supply chain secret, will this single dad surrender or turn the tables for justice? But before that cold threat ever reached his ears, Quincy's morning looked nothing like a battlefield at all. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:31 in the morning. Its old bell rattled against the nightstand. Quincy sat up on a thin mattress above the shop. The wood floor creaked under his bare feet. Cold air slipped through a crack near the window. He pulled the blanket back over Ruby's shoulders. She hugged an old teddy bear with one missing eye. Her breathing was slow and even. He watched her for a moment before he moved on. Downstairs, the smell of wet pine mixed with old espresso oil. The scent had soaked into the walls for decades. Quincy ran his fingers over the brass machine from the 80s. Its metal felt cold at first, then warm under his palm. He wiped each glass cup by hand under a dim yellow light. Every cup had a small chip near the rim. He set them down without a single clink of glass on glass. He opened the cash drawer. The hinge groaned softly. He counted the bills twice, just to be sure. $12.40. That was all that remained after he paid $45,000 for this old shop. The heating bill sat unpaid on the counter. He pushed it under a stack of napkins, out of sight for now. His nose caught a strange smell from the coffee sack near the door. Quincy leaned down and breathed in deep. Years as a compliance director had trained his senses well. This batch felt too damp for a mountain shop like his. Something was off by just over 1%. He grabbed a piece of chalk from the tin can by the register. On the board outside, he wrote 3 words in careful letters: clean coffee. Warm home. Outside, the town of Cascade Ridge sat quiet under a gray morning sky. Mist hung low over the pine trees on the far ridge. A single truck rumbled past, its engine echoing down the empty street. Quincy stepped back inside and checked the small clock above the door. School would start soon, and Ruby still needed her breakfast. He cracked 2 eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the small kitchen. Ruby patted down the stairs in her socks, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She climbed onto a stool at the counter and watched her father work. "Can I taste the new beans today, Daddy?" she asked, yawning halfway through a question. "Not yet, baby girl," Quincy said, smiling as he plated her eggs. "Coffee is for grown-ups. Milk is for growing girls." Ruby giggled and swung her feet under the stool. For a moment, the worry in Quincy's chest eased just a little. Would his savings, his hands, and his hope be enough to protect this small shop for what was coming? At 1:17 in the afternoon, the wind chime by the door rang hard and fast. Victoria Davenport walked in, her heels striking the old floorboards. 2 lawyers in black suits followed close behind her. Her emerald green dress moved with each step she took. Her leather bag alone cost more than Quincy made in a full month. She stopped near the counter and frowned at a drop of rusty water falling from the ceiling. Quincy lay flat on the floor, fixing a leaking pipe under the counter. Grease covered his cheek and jaw. Metal shavings dusted his forearms. He did not look up right away. Marcus Vance, her lawyer, placed a thick folder on the scratched wooden table. Next to it, he set a check with sharp, careful fingers. $22,500. A tiny price for a whole life's work. "This town is being rezoned," Victoria said, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "Your stubbornness will only get this place seized by the city. You will not get a single dollar." Quincy pushed himself up slowly from the floor. Metal creaked under his boots as he rose. He stood to his full height, and his broad shoulders filled the narrow space between them. He said nothing yet. His jaw tightened beneath his beard, but something behind his eyes had already begun to change. How would a tired single father answer a threat from a woman who once destroyed his career? Victoria left a 24-hour deadline behind her when she walked out. Quincy locked the door and sat down on an old oak chair. He stared at the check resting on the table. If he said no, her lawyers could push the city to pull his food safety permit. His name was already ruined across the entire beverage industry. No company in America would ever hire him again. He thought back to the day security walked him out of Apex headquarters in Chicago. No evidence, no warning, just cold whispers about stolen secrets that were never true. His hands felt heavy in his lap. His chest tightened with each slow breath he took. "Am I being selfish?" he whispered to the empty room. "Making my daughter suffer through a fight I cannot win?" His hand trembled as he picked up the pen from the table. The tip touched the paper near the signature line. Outside, rain began tapping against the front window in a slow, steady rhythm. Quincy closed his eyes and listened to the sound, trying to steady his breathing. He thought about the promise he made to Ruby the night they moved into this shop. He had told her this place would be their forever home, no matter what happened. His fingers gripped the pen tighter. A memory flashed through his mind of Ruby's mother, gone 3 years now, telling him to always stand for what was right. The pen hovered above the paper for a long, quiet moment. Then Quincy set it down without signing a single letter. What could possibly pull this broken man back from the edge of giving up? At 3 in the afternoon, Ruby ran home from school, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She jumped straight into her father's arms without slowing down. In her small hand, she held a crayon drawing. Two people held hands under a bright yellow sun outside a tiny coffee shop. The colors were bold and a little messy at the edges. "Daddy, kids at school said robots are coming to knock our shop down," Ruby said, her voice small. "But I love your coffee best. It smells like Mom." Quincy's throat felt tight for a moment. He knelt down and hugged her close. The bell above the door rang again. Silas, 67 years old, walked in carrying a bag of fresh Cascade beans on his shoulder. He glanced at the contract on the table and let out a long, tired sigh. "This shop is the heart of Ridgeview," Silas said, setting the bag down carefully. "Since my grandfather's time, folks have gathered here. Don't let cold machines steal our memories." Silas placed an old wooden box on the counter, its hinges squeaking with age. Inside were water and soil test records from years earlier. They proved the valley held rare, mineral-rich water no other town could claim. Quincy looked down at his daughter's drawing, then over at the old records in his hands. His honor, he realized, was the only example he could leave for Ruby. Silas pulled out an old photograph from his coat pocket, its edges soft and worn from years of handling. It showed a much younger Silas standing beside Quincy's grandfather outside this very shop. "Your family and mine go back further than you know," Silas said, tapping the photograph gently. "I promised your grandfather I'd watch over this street. I don't break promises." Quincy studied the faded photograph for a long moment, his throat tight with emotion. He had never seen this picture before tonight. Ruby tugged at Silas's sleeve, asking if he wanted a cup of the new coffee. Silas laughed, a warm sound that filled the small shop. "Only if your daddy brews it," Silas said, winking down at her. "Best cup in the whole state, and I've tried them all." Quincy filled 3 small cups and set them on the counter, the steam curling up between them. For a moment, the 3 of them simply sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain outside. What would this quiet, broken man do now to fight back against a giant? At 5 the next evening, a black SUV pulled up outside the shop, its tires crunching on gravel. Marcus Vance stepped out with a smug smile, already expecting a signed contract in return. Quincy walked outside without hurrying. He carried no papers in his hands. Instead, he pulled out a lighter and burned the check right there on the stone steps. The flame curled the paper edges to black. Ash drifted across the cold, evening air. "My dignity is not for sale," Quincy said, his voice steady and clear. "Tell your company to see me in court instead." Marcus Vance stood frozen for a moment, staring at the smoking ashes on the steps. He climbed back into the SUV without another word, his smug smile now gone. Thunder rolled across the mountains behind him, low and heavy. A storm was building fast over Cascade Ridge. Quincy closed the shop early and turned the basement into his own private lab. Rain began hammering the tin roof above him as he worked through the evening. Each drop echoed like a small drumbeat, steady and unrelenting against the metal. He wiped years of dust off an old mass spectrometer with a rag. He had bought it long ago from a closing school lab. Tonight, it would become his only weapon against the giant. What terrible plan would the giant corporation launch against one stubborn father? The next morning, 2 city inspectors showed up at the door before sunrise. Apex had hired them quietly, using money and pressure. They taped an emergency shutdown notice to the window, claiming faulty wiring inside. Local dairy and sugar suppliers canceled their standing orders one by one that same week. They feared losing their bigger contracts, with Apex across the whole state. Quincy stood behind the counter, staring at the empty delivery crates stacked by the door. His jaw tightened as he counted what little stock remained on the shelf. He would need to drive 2 hours just to buy simple sugar. A young waitress named Dana, who worked shifts at the diner across the street, stopped by with a small bag of flour. "My boss doesn't know I'm here," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder at the empty street. "But this town remembers who you are, Quincy." Silas and a few neighbors showed up that evening with firewood and clean water jugs. Together, they rewired the shop before the next inspection could arrive. An older man named Walt, who once worked as an electrician before he retired, checked every wire with steady, careful hands. "These wires are fine," Walt muttered, shaking his head slowly. "Somebody wanted an excuse, not a real fix." Ruby handed each helper a warm mug of cocoa from a small wooden tray. She smiled at every neighbor by name, thanking them one by one in her small, careful voice. Quincy watched his daughter move through the room, and his chest swelled with quiet pride. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Clint Radford sat behind a wide glass desk on the 40th floor. He swirled a glass of expensive whiskey, watching the city lights flicker below him. His assistant knocked and reminded him about the Cascade Ridge numbers falling behind schedule. Clint waved her off without looking up from his screen. He called Marcus Vance in secret, his voice low and sharp. "Make that man disappear from Oregon," he ordered coldly, "before Victoria learns who he really is." Clint hung up and leaned back in his leather chair, a thin smile crossing his face. He had erased evidence before. He was certain he could do it again. Quincy stayed up all night that week. He helped Ruby with her spelling homework by lantern light. Then, after she fell asleep, he tested coffee samples meant for the new Apex Go stores. His eyes burned from exhaustion, but his hands stayed steady over the glass tubes. What was hiding inside those beans that made Quincy work through the night like this? At 9 that night, Quincy slipped past the construction fence outside town. His old training in sourcing safety guided every careful step he took through the dark. He avoided the guards' flashlights and reached a row of unopened shipping containers near the back lot. He pulled 3 small samples from a container marked APX 9087. Back in his basement lab, he ran the samples through his old machine. The needle jumped hard across the glowing screen. His stomach turned as the numbers climbed. The results showed a banned pesticide called Glyphos X hiding inside the beans. The level reached 4.2 parts per million, far past any safe limit allowed in the country. This was the same cheap coffee that Clint Radford had approved to cut costs by 40%. It was the very reason Quincy had been fired 1 year earlier for speaking up about it. His hands shook slightly as the truth settled over him. He copied every result onto a small drive with careful clicks. Then he wrote the full formula by hand into an old leather notebook, page after page. The old furnace in the basement hummed low behind him, its metal frame ticking as it cooled. Somewhere upstairs, the wind pushed against a loose shutter, tapping it twice against the frame. Quincy sat back in a chair and rubbed his eyes with both hands. 900 families in this town alone drank Apex coffee every single morning, without knowing the risk. He thought of Ruby sleeping upstairs, unaware of the danger creeping through their small mountain town. His resolve hardened like stone inside his chest. He slid the notebook into his jacket pocket, close against his heart. From now on, he decided it would never leave his side. Would Quincy live long enough to share this dangerous secret with the world? At 11:30 that night, the front window shattered into pieces across the floor. Two masked men rushed inside the dark shop without a word. They did not touch the cash register at all. Instead, they smashed the old brass espresso machine with steel bars again and again. It was the only gift left from the shop's original owner. Quincy ran down the stairs to protect Ruby, who was crying under the table. A steel bar struck his shoulder hard from behind. He fell onto the cold, glass-covered floor with a sharp cry. The masked men grabbed his laptop and crushed the small drive under a boot heel. Every trace of his hidden evidence vanished in seconds. At 2 a.m, Quincy lay in a hospital bed under bright white lights. Stitches lined his forehead in a thin, dark line. His arm was wrapped tight in white bandage from wrist to elbow. Ruby slept in a plastic chair beside him, worn out from fear and tears. Quincy watched her chest rise and fall in the quiet room. His fist clenched hard despite the sharp pain shooting through his shoulder. Yet something steady still burned behind his tired, swollen eyes. A nurse checked his chart and adjusted the bandage on his arm with gentle hands. "You're lucky it wasn't worse," she said softly, glancing toward Ruby. "That little girl loves you very much." Quincy nodded, unable to find any words just yet. He watched the machines beside his bed blink in slow, steady rhythm. Every beat felt like a small reminder that he was still breathing, still fighting. He thought about the smashed espresso machine downstairs, its brass frame twisted and broken. He thought about the crushed drive and every hour of work now lost forever. For the first time since he opened the shop, Quincy allowed himself to feel truly afraid. Who would step in now, at the darkest hour of this small family's life? The next morning, Victoria arrived at the same hospital for a routine checkup after a long field trip. In the waiting area, she noticed a little girl crying alone by a stuck vending machine. Victoria bought Ruby a fresh carton of milk with her own card, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She sat down beside her on the cold plastic chair. Ruby wiped her nose with the back of her hand and thanked her quietly. She held the milk carton, with both hands still sniffling from the vending machine. Ruby looked up at Victoria's fine coat, her eyes wide and curious. "You look like the people from the big company that hurt my dad," she said softly. "He said they got too busy to remember how to be kind." Victoria opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out at first. She simply nodded, letting the child's honesty settle over her. Victoria's chest tightened at the child's words. She asked for her name in a quiet voice. The moment she heard Ruby Miller, her whole body went still. That name matched a strange filing case that Clint Radford had pushed through the year before. She remembered the file, clearly now, sitting untouched on her desk for months. Quincy stepped out of his room, with a bandaged arm, moving slowly down the hallway. Instead of anger, he looked straight at Victoria with calm, steady eyes. He handed her his old leather notebook, filled with careful chemical notes. "I don't want your money," Quincy said quietly, his voice hoarse from the night before. "But look closely at what your company plans to sell this town." Victoria took the notebook in her hands, her fingers pausing over the worn leather cover. Her eyes moved across every careful number written inside. Doubt about Clint Radford began growing heavy inside her chest. She looked up at Quincy, studying the stitches on his forehead and the bandage on his arm. "Who did this to you?" she asked quietly, her voice losing its usual sharp edge. "I don't know their faces, Quincy said. But I know who gave the order, and I think you might know him better than I do. Victoria's grip on the notebook tightened. She thought of Clint Radford's confident smile during board meetings and how easily she had trusted him for years. A cold, uncomfortable feeling settled in her stomach. For the first time, she wondered how much else she had missed inside her own company. Would Victoria protect her company or stand beside the truth she had just discovered? Back in her hotel room, that night, Victoria refused to use the company's own network. She hired an outside security firm to dig quietly through old deleted files. She paced the hotel room while she waited, the city lights of Portland glowing faintly through the curtains. Her coffee had gone cold on the desk beside her laptop. At 11 that night, the report finally landed on her screen. She leaned closer, reading every line twice, her pulse quickening with each new detail. On the exact day Quincy was fired, a strange payment appeared in a private account. Clint Radford's bank in the Cayman Islands received $3 million for $100,000. The money came from a coffee supplier based in South America. Every one of Quincy's old safety reports had been deleted by hand from the company's servers. Someone had worked carefully to erase every trace of the warning he once gave. Clint soon noticed Victoria digging through those hidden files late that night. He quickly gathered board members loyal to him with a string of urgent calls. He planned an emergency vote for Friday afternoon to remove Victoria from her own company. Quincy left the hospital the next morning and returned to his broken shop. Sunlight streamed through the shattered window, catching small pieces of glass scattered across the floor. With Silas by his side, he began sweeping the mess into careful piles. Ruby helped too, picking up crayon-colored pencils that had scattered during the break-in. Quincy gathered every paper record kept safe down in the basement, checking each folder twice. His injured arm ached with every careful movement, but he refused to slow down. By late afternoon, the shop looked less like a crime scene and more like a home again. At 2 a.m, Victoria called him, her voice tight with urgency. "Quincy, I need you at our Portland office Friday afternoon," she said. "This may be our only chance to fix this." Could a disgraced worker and an isolated CEO bring down a powerful man before the whole company watched? Friday at 2 p.m, the meeting room on the 32nd floor filled with tense silence. Clint Radford stood tall at the podium, boasting about a 15% profit increase from the new automated stores. He demanded the board remove Victoria for stalling the Cascade Ridge project any longer. Clint tapped his pen against the podium, glancing at the clock, eager to finish before anyone could object. Then the heavy wooden door swung open with a low, echoing creak. Quincy Miller walked inside slowly, his footsteps steady on the polished floor. He no longer wore his stained work clothes from the shop. Every head in the room turned at once, chairs creaking as people shifted to look. A simple gray suit fit him well across his broad shoulders. His calm eyes silenced the entire room within seconds. Behind him walked Victoria Davenport, her chin held high and certain. 2 federal agents from the Food and Drug Administration followed close behind her. Quincy stepped up to the screen and plugged in a new drive holding every recovered file. The chemical report and the payment records filled the large display for everyone to see clearly. Clint's face turned pale white as the numbers appeared behind him. "This is a lie from some fired lunatic," he shouted, backing slowly toward the wall. A federal agent stepped forward and read out his arrest warrant in a calm, firm voice. "Bribery, endangering public health, and destroying evidence." Guards led Clint out in handcuffs, while the whole board watched in silence. Quincy stood tall in the middle of the room, his shoulders finally relaxed. Board members who once mocked him now lowered their eyes in shame. Victoria stepped forward and addressed the stunned room in a clear, firm voice. "Effective immediately, Clint Radford is terminated," she said. "This company owes Quincy Miller a debt it can never fully repay." One older board member, a woman who had worked with the company for 30 years, stood and began a clap. Slowly, The rest of the room followed, the sound rising, until it filled the tall glass hall. Quincy did not smile right away. He simply nodded once, his eyes finding Victoria's across the crowded room. Something between them had shifted for good. Outside the tall windows, the afternoon sun broke through the Portland clouds for the first time all week. After the storm finally passed, what would come next for Quincy, Ruby, and their small shop back home? 1 month later, snow had stopped falling over Cascade Ridge for the first time in weeks. Warm afternoon light poured through the large front window of the copper drip. The shop looked whole again, brighter than Quincy remembered it. Its old pine walls stayed the same, but new safety wiring now ran quietly behind them. The floor no longer creaked under careless feet. The brass espresso machine gleamed like new, fully repaired by a craftsman for Portland. A small engraved line on its frame read, "A gift of persistence." Apex issued a public apology to Quincy across the entire country. They paid him $1,850,000 for the harm done to his name and career. Instead of building robot stores across the valley, Apex chose to fund the Clean Cascade Coffee Project. Quincy became its independent safety director, buying beans fairly from Silas and other local farmers nearby. Victoria walked into the shop alone that afternoon, without a single lawyer beside her. She wore a simple sweater and sat by the same cracked wooden table near the window. Quincy smiled and brought her a warm cup of coffee, steam rising gently between them. In the corner, Ruby added a new figure to her old family drawing. A woman with golden hair now stood beside her father in the picture. Quincy watched his daughter laugh under the soft afternoon sun, her crayons scattered across the floor. He gave Victoria a small, quiet nod across the table. Silas walked in a few minutes later, carrying a fresh sack of beans over one shoulder. He set it down by the counter and glanced around the bright, busy room with a satisfied smile. "Feels like the old days," Silas said, settling onto a stool. "Better, actually. This town finally got its due." Ruby ran over and showed Silas her finished drawing, pointing proudly at each small figure. Silas studied it carefully, then nodded with approval, telling her it belonged on the wall. Quincy hung the drawing near the register, right beside the chalkboard sign he had written weeks earlier. Clean coffee, warm home. Both promises, he realized, had finally come true. A few regular customers drifted in, filling the small tables with quiet conversation and the clink of spoons against cups. The old brass machine hissed softly, filling the room with a rich, familiar smell. Ruby climbed onto her father's lap for a moment, resting her head against his chest. Quincy kissed the top of her head and looked out at the room he had almost lost. Outside, the afternoon light stretched long and golden across Ridgeview Avenue. Real peace had finally come home to stay.